is going to be for the public, so be careful,
Ooh,
gents. Yeah.
I'm glad that last part didn't get out there.
Yeah,
Woo!
good thing that just got through there on the Audible Live every Thursday night right here at youtube.com/footballguys.com. Cecil Lammy, Sigmund Blue, Matt Waldman, Dr. Gene Bramall here to talk fantasy football. We're going to break in with some, of course, some injury news and notes to discuss and start off with Dr. Gene Bramall. But first, we've got a game, and we've got a sponsor that I need to tell you about, FanDuel.com. Listen, a couple of contests that FanDuel.com is having. You need to check them out right now, FanDuel.com. Their Playboy contest and their $300,000 Survivor contest. Two things that are must-see if you're a fantasy owner and must participate as well. Check out FanDuel.com. The leader in one-week fantasy football leagues for real money with immediate cash payouts. The money is real. There's no season-long commitment. There's no upfront fees. Just real cash if you're good enough, baby. Check it out, FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. Sign up today. Let's go around the horn. Bloom, baby, how are you doing tonight?
Not as good as Eli Manning, but this game could be a game yet. But this is a fun one to watch. And what we're seeing is Eli and this offense, dare I say, could have that Andy Dalton appeal. I know Jay Gruden's coaching Washington, but that Andy Dalton appeal of when they're facing weaker defenses, and yes, Washington qualifies, he's going to be a good play. And we now are recontextualizing all these games. Doing poorly against the Lions and the Cardinals is nothing to hang your head about when you're facing the Texans, who they really seem to catch off guard. And now you just see Eli. And what's funny is we talk about this stuff all offseason. Well, these are the goals of this offense. Get the ball out quickly. Don't have Eli think too much. Let guys like Cruz and Randall do things after the catch. None of us saw Larry Donnell coming. But you see the confidence. You see the buy-in. And Rashad Jennings deserves a lot of credit, and so does Matt Waldman, for pushing people towards Jennings in the preseason, because you can tell that he's the heart. He's the engine. And they're kind of following his cue, because he's an all-effort guy, and I think the Giants needed somebody like that to light the fuse.
Light the fuse, indeed they have, just like Matt Waldman does all the time. And Bloom brings up confidence and comfort. That's what Donnell brings Eli, because he just needs that security blanket tight end, man. He hasn't looked the same since the old black unicorn moved on.
Absolutely, and Donnell's looking terrific because he's using his height well, being able to make plays where you just throw it up. It doesn't even have to be a back shoulder catch. It can just be one where he has to turn and post up a little bit, and he seems to have a knack for that. And that, 3 touchdowns in the first half, it's unbelievable. And you look at the fact that this team is starting to get a little bit better in terms of its blocking scheme. You're seeing what really Rashad Jennings is able to do. He looked pretty good even against Detroit and against the Cardinals, but against a team like the Texans last week and even this week against Washington, you're seeing some bigger holes opening up and him being able to take advantage of that. And the difference between him and a guy like Andre Williams is Andre Williams gets 4 yards on draw plays that should go for 8, and Rashad Jennings gets 20 yards on plays that should go for 8. And that's that tells you a little bit about the experience level and also just an understanding of vision and being able to use his physical skills to its maximum extent. And when that happens, you get a nice interplay with run pass with running back tight end, and that's the type of thing that's working out well for them.
Yeah, and that makes it easy and comfortable for Eli. Speaking of easy and comfortable, and he's everything that A-Rod wasn't, he's Gene Bramall. I got that right? Did I get that baseball reference right, Dr. Gene?
That's Jeter Bramall.
Look at the lips. They're not blue. They look kind of blue in the TV, actually.
Well, I won't tell you what Jeter just did, so.
Oh, no. Now
Walk-off game-winning hit.
Wow.
From Mr. Jeter.
Wow, and farewell to you, kind sir.
All right, this is a Broncos show.
Yes.
So, I think Larry Donnell, didn't I Google him the same night I had to Google Tom Savage and make fun of Larry Donnell? So I'm sorry, everybody. I'm done with all that.
Larry Donnell proving that you don't need to be the most athletic. And we've learned this before, Bloom. Let's toss that around about Donnell. For the listeners that don't know, we're recording this live as of right now. Eli Manning is 20 of 24, 209 yards, 3 touchdowns, no INTs, all 3 touchdowns to Donnell. As Matt said, making plays. And this is where scouting analyst hat, fantasy football analyst hat, there has to be some differentiation because of Donnell's skill set. And we've seen this before, Bloom, from other players that aren't the greatest athletes, not the biggest, not the fastest, not the strongest, but still produce for fantasy owners, and that's exactly what Donnell is doing.
Right. What you're seeing from him is, and in some ways, where did he come from? Well, he filled the vacuum left by Adrian Robinson. The Jason Pierre-Paul tight ends did not live up to that Jerry Reese billing, and you have some different things intersecting here. Again, if it's an offense that's getting the ball out quickly, your tight end's going to come open earlier in progressions. He's a big receiver, not very fast. He's fluid, and he's got really good ball skills. That's what's inspiring that trust. And again, like we pointed out earlier this week on our shows, Donnell fumbled inside the 5 or inside the 10 last week early in the Texans game, and they kept going back to him. See, Grandpa Coughlin, you don't have to punish. You don't have to slap guys on the wrist when they fumble. You just go back to them because they're important parts of your team. So it's the ball skills and the fluid athleticism. He's not a special player in any fashion, but this role, and Ben McAdoo's a former tight end coach, that probably helps a little bit. So in this role in this offense, a competent player is going to put up these kind of numbers, apparently.
And that's why everyone was saying, okay, let's get him Jermichael Finley or whatever. Like, well, they found their guy to work, and it certainly wasn't Brandon Myers. And again, Martellus Bennett moves on. Now Larry Donnell has become Eli's guy. Matt, and all the work that you do at the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, these type of players, and again, we talk about current realities, new incarnations, whatever, but these type of players that maybe don't jump off the film and certainly don't jump off the measurables in fantasy analyst versus pre-draft analyst, and that different hat that sometimes can be the same, oftentimes is the same, but there's that hat that you have to be able to switch off and say, yes, he's not the most physically gifted, but damn, is he putting up numbers.
Yeah, and I think part of that is just having perspective as someone who's looking at the draft, and you have to have enough perspective. I think Josh Norris does a great job of that, saying, where does this guy win? And I really do like what Josh has to say about that, because they don't, and the way that he went into it is you don't grade a guy to say, grade a guy against perfection. Because if you grade a guy against perfection, then only folks who come close are good prospects or good fantasy prospects. So if you look at them and say, do they have the bare minimum that you're looking for to fit into the NFL, then you start looking at how would they fit in the NFL? What type of teams would they fit with? And then you can look at guys like Lorenzo Taliaferro, and while everyone's, or Alfred Blue, and somebody could say, well, why would Alfred Blue, you have Alfred Blue rated low, how come, what did you not see? When the answer would be, actually, it's not what you didn't see, it's just the fact that he's rated low compared to the rest of this class. Doesn't mean that he doesn't have the bare minimum skills to be a decent NFL running back if given the opportunity. So it's the same thing with Donnell. You've got the height, you've got the hands, you've got enough quickness that you can run a slant, split out wide, like you just saw about 3 minutes ago in this game in the early third quarter, and you have a player who has potential if used in the right type of an offense. And I think that that's really where it comes from, is that you're grading guys in terms of ability, but then you're also grading based on if they fit in the right situation, can they contribute. And then it's more about likelihoods of whether they're going to get into that situation. And Donnell, being a former quarterback out of Grambling, you look at that and go, the likelihood wasn't very large that he was going to get an early opportunity. It's just that, like Bloom said, the Giants blew it on their guy that they wanted to have. They bypassed any tight end that was worth anything in the draft this year, and as a result, Donnell gets his opportunity.
Hey, I love Ted Thompson, but at least the Giants didn't trade away the pick that became Julius Thomas. So they could move back in the 7th round and draft DJ Williams, the other Arkansas DJ Williams. So there's that. One more quickly before we get to Dr. Gene, just on tonight's game. Bloom, I'll start with you. Have we not looked into Ruben Randall close enough? Now, again, everyone knows I'm an LSU honk. Everyone knows Randall's had his trouble being consistent. Even this year. But we look at routes run, he's ahead of guys like Antonio Brown, Randall Cobb, Keenan Allen, Marcus Colston, Alshon Jeffrey, and Ruben Randall only has, again, before tonight's game, only has 2 fewer targets than did Victor Cruz. Again, in this offense, no Odell Beckham Jr., and that'll certainly complicate things when Odell comes back. But have we, undersold or underappreciated Ruben Randall here based on what he's done tonight? Caught everything thrown his way, looks like.
I don't know that he's underappreciated. I think that he's showing a bit more maturity in his game than what we've seen, although they're using him like a possession receiver. I mean, that's the thing. Sure, he's getting a lot of targets, but he's still yet to average over 10 yards a catch in any game this year. He is somebody who had a knack for the end zone last year, although, again, tonight it's Larry Donnell. Another game it may be Victor Cruz. Another game they may go to Rashad Jennings. He's not going to be the number one target. He's just another target in the red zone. He doesn't look like a dynamic downfield receiver, and I think that was what people were picturing whenever the Giants drafted him in the late second round. So in PPR leagues, he can be a wide receiver 3 flex type, especially when this offense is clicking. You're going to pick your matchups. But as a dynamic receiver or somebody who's one of the first options every time they get in the red zone, I don't think Randall's going to live up to that. He is a better player than what we saw last year, though, and I don't want to overshadow that.
Yeah, definitely improving on his game. Matt, to you with Ruben Randall and thoughts on how he's looked better. Bloom said more mature. I think that's a great way to play it. His game is more mature this season.
Yeah, certainly. You're going to, hopefully, if you work at your craft, you're going to be able to, be sharper with the reads that you make with your quarterback of the defense, and a little bit more skilled with your routes, and also just more consistent making catches that you should make. And that's what you're seeing a little bit out of Randall right now. And certainly he has a capability of being a quality NFL starter from wire to wire. It's just a matter of whether or not he's, remains healthy and consistent, and if Odell Beckham doesn't overtake him and become one of those guys like Michael Crabtree who misses a lot of camp and misses a lot of time and comes in and just takes it by storm. I don't expect that to happen with Beckham, but you never know sometimes with players.
Yeah, a couple of Bayou Bengal receivers there in Randall and Beckham. I would always say Isaac Bruce. That's what I always go back to, Matt, because Bruce had the same thing. It was like, is he ever going to play? Damn hamstrings. And when he did play, he was fantastic. Speaking of fantastic, Dr. Gene Bramall up next. Dr. Gene, you like the fist pump there. Let's jump into the injury segment of today's show. We'll go through, talk some injuries, then we'll bounce out. We'll talk a little bit more what's going on in this game and around the NFL, and then back for some Twitter questions to wrap up tonight's show. And we're going to start with Jamal Charles. Every fantasy owner's waiting with bated breath for this Monday night game. No, not because it's Patriots and Chiefs, but because it could be the return of Jamal Charles. What's your feel on this situation as we sit here on Thursday night, Dr. Gene?
I think he's going to play. I think, and we talked about this on Monday on the injury side of the waiver wire show. I'm wondering if the bigger concern with Jamal Charles, at least this week, not ongoing, but with Knile Davis playing as well as he's played over the past couple of weeks, how much of a role he's going to have. Will they be easing Jamal Charles back? We've seen Andy Reid multiple times over the past couple of years give Jamal Charles less than 10 touches. So I think that's something we could potentially see again this week. But, we heard from Ian Rappaport on Sunday that he's heard that it's more of a bruise than a high ankle sprain. I'm not too sure what to make of that necessarily, but 2 weeks of healing. I thought he looked pretty good in pregame warm-ups. Some of the clips that BJ Kissel was putting on Twitter, I think he looked good in pregame warm-ups, maybe just a little bit of a limp there. Another full week and an extra day of rest leading into this Monday night game. I think barring some sort of surprising setback in practice this week, and he didn't have one on Thursday, Jamal Charles is going to play Monday night.
Gene, I just want to clarify that, okay? Would you say, and we'll talk about this on Sunday morning too, but for those people who aren't going to tune in Sunday morning, and you'll publish your Sunday morning thoughts too, so you got them covered. But as of this moment, assuming nothing changes, if you have to make your decision between Charles and Davis and you own both, or if you just own one and you're weighing them against similar options, do we go forth into Sunday morning, if nothing changes, as if Charles is going to start?
Yes, I think Charles will start, and I also think you're going to see Charles, if they restrict his role, it's going to be on those early running downs, and he'll still be used as Joe McKnight was used last week, I think, in a heavy passing role. So even if Jamal Charles is not going to get 20 rushes, I think it's possible that he can get 20 touches, even if he's only getting 12 to 15 carries. But I think this is worth you guys passing around, you and Matt and Cecil, back and forth to say, what do we think about Knile Davis? Did he do enough in these past couple of games? If Jamal Jamal Charles is fully healthy and he gets back to a full practice on Friday, are we going to see Niall Davis take 10 to 12 carries, or does this go back to the way it was before Charles was hurt?
Well, I'll take the first shot and I'll hand it off to Matt. I mean, Davis did some things. He's big, and when he gets in the open field, he does. The thing about Davis that you didn't like at Arkansas, you do see as an asset in the pros when he gets to the second level, which is he thinks he's a lot niftier than he really is. But he did get down to business and start running more efficiently when he's gotten these opportunities with the Chiefs going back to the playoffs last year. But I don't think he did anything to make you say, well, we need to rethink this backfield, and we need to rethink how much we're using Jamal Charles here. I think, if anything, it was just a reminder to Andy Reid that what happened in Week 1, that Charles got 11 touches, that should never, ever, ever happen in this offense.
I'll say this. He's basically a big crease bully. That's what Niall Davis is. Give him a nice crease, and he'll get downhill, and he gets a running start, and he'll run through arm tackles. He may even bounce off a hit occasionally, and he'll make a pretty move in the open field, as Bloom said. But I haven't seen much different from him than what I saw from him at Arkansas. And I believe my projection was I wouldn't take him as a starter, but he certainly can fill in and be a decent back if you need him to be. And that's what he's done. The fact that they needed to put in Joe McKnight, who hasn't been in football for a little bit of time, to catch all those passes this weekend is a telling thing. And that also makes the offense a little more predictable in some cases if you have to take Davis out of the game there. And I would say that there were some really pretty scheme designs with Niall Davis in the backfield, some misdirection that they used that worked out very well for him. So when it comes to that, I'm not really looking at him and being really, I would say exactly thrilled with him. He's a decent player, but not one that's going to take over for Jamal Charles. And this year is what I would call the interception machine, otherwise known as Kirk Cousins. So there we go.
And that Bloom coming off the rose there. I will say this about Niall Davis, agreeing with what Matt said. He's the same player that we saw at Arkansas. He's staying healthy. That's something he didn't do regularly for the Razorbacks. And you call it a big gap bully. I call it a space runner. If the holes are huge and he can get up to top speed, he's tough to bring down. He's a swift runner. He's a backup. And Jamal Charles is a better option. Matt, it's your turn to pepper Dr. Gene with questions. Look at Gene turning the tables on us. What's down is up. What's up is down.
Yeah, I know. So let's talk about Arian Foster and his injury and whether or not we're going to be seeing more of Alfred Blue as a result of this, or is Foster going to get back in there and be the offense that he was in at least the first game?
Yeah, we're not going to get clarity on this until We're not going to get clarity on this until inactives on Sunday morning, I don't think. I think we're probably going to see another good, yes, all of that water. Good job. I don't think water is what we originally had in mind, unless that's vodka, Matt. I don't think we're going to hear enough about Arian Foster to make a decision until inactives. Maybe we'll hear Adam Schefter or Ian Rappaport or Jay Glazer give us some information before then. But I think, Bill O'Brien has already said that Arian Foster is going to be a game-time decision. That's not likely to change. Last week he went through 3 consecutive limited practices and still wasn't cleared to play on Sunday. Arian Foster told us that he wasn't 100% on Monday, kind of backed off that a little bit and said he was day-to-day rather than week-to-week on Monday after that initial comment that he wasn't 100%. But, we've seen this before with Arian Foster. He doesn't recover quickly from muscle strains, hamstrings, groin, calf, what have you. He aggravates them frequently. I think it's a good sign that he's been able to get able to practice as much as he has over the past couple of weeks, but I would not feel comfortable saying Arian Foster is going to be his usual part of the Houston offense until we see him back on the field and doing that. I don't think this is the same thing as a Charles Niall Davis situation. I don't think Alfred Blue or anybody else that Houston has is going to cut into Foster's workload. I think if they put Foster back on the field, we can probably trust that he's going to get 20 to 25 touches if the game script works in his favor in that way. But I don't know that I would trust that. We've seen time and time again where what we're hoping to be a 2 or 3 day injury turns into a 2 or 3 week injury. So check back in on Sunday morning is the best I can do, I think, here.
Matt, what was that thing?
Gin?
Show us that.
A clear liquor. His clear liquors are horrible hangovers, though.
Wow. Wow. You better get some biscuits and gravy, something for
Or is it
that.
Rumplemints? Rumplemints is a little more. It would be a little cooler, and it would have a little more syrupy kind of consistency.
Yuck.
You're
Chicken
not
and
too far
waffles.
from moonshine country there. So watch out for that. Dr. Gene Bramall here, our injury segment on the Audible Live. Dr. Gene Bramall, of course, footballguys.com, at Gene Bramall on Twitter. And now we get to talk about Calvin Johnson. Calvin Johnson, the status is unknown right now with the ankle injury week 4 against the New York Jets, after he missed the second straight day of practice. Now, you're hearing things that he's more hurt than he's letting on. This one comes across the wire from mlive.com, and it looks like, Dr. Gene, he's hurting more than he's letting on. Calvin Johnson, a couple of days down. I know we have Friday, so maybe all of this is alleviated tomorrow as Johnson participates fully, but no 2 days back-to-back now with Calvin Johnson and his status being unknown. Second straight day of practice missed today. What's your thoughts on Megatron and this ankle injury?
Well, I think we're eventually going to be okay on Sunday. However, I was asked a number of times today whether or not I think this is just veteran rest. And, Jim Caldwell said he subscribes to that. He'll allow his veterans some rest days, but that's not what's going on here. Calvin Johnson is getting pretty aggressively treated for whatever ankle situation is bothering him, and I think it's more of a nagging deal than one specific injury. I didn't see anything that made me think he's got a high ankle mechanism or anything like that, but even though Calvin Johnson has played well with very little practice and sometimes no practice over the past couple of years as he fights through fingers and knees and those sorts of things, we have seen him miss games. There was a situation last year where he sat out with a knee injury that was kind of got chronic on him. So I don't think that's what we're going to see. Calvin Johnson was talking to the media on Wednesday, was pretty optimistic that he just needed to get it right. I'd like to see him say some of the same things after practice on Friday. Would like to see him get through a limited practice on Friday if possible. But I think you can plan on Johnson playing, and with this particular matchup, I think he has to be in your lineup, unless we hear something very pessimistic on Friday afternoon.
I'd be pessimistic about Kirk Cousins right now with his interception from the end zone. 2 interceptions. We're up to 2. Matt, you need to have some sort of little counter behind you that you pull off every time he throws an interception tonight.
Get a bell that rings. Every time a bell rings, Kirk Cousins throws a pick.
Every time Kirk Cousins throws a pick, an angel gets its wings. All right.
All right, Zuzu.
Gene.
Bloom.
Eric Decker. Okay. Whether it's Eric Decker or Jeremy Curley, do we know enough, just based on how things went Monday night and what we haven't seen from Decker at this point in the week, to say, assume Curley will start and Decker will not play? Would it be a great upset at this point if Decker played?
Great upset might be strong, but I'm not expecting to see him play. I think, an aggravation. It's basically his third aggravation. So he had a hamstring injury in the preseason. It was aggravated during week 2. He tried to play on Monday night in week 3 and aggravated it again. So it would be hard for me to think that on a short week with just, with 1 day less rest, that we're going to see Eric Decker back on the field in any sort of meaningful capacity. So I think it's Jeremy Curley starting. And I think Decker, I think it's more likely that he misses 2 weeks than misses 0 weeks. We'll put it that way.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Demaryius Thomas. What's going on with him?
I'm not sure. I think, we're hearing foot. When you watch the video, on the television replays, it looks like they were paying a little bit more attention to his ankle. It's his left foot, it's his left ankle, and that's the same side where he had the foot surgery, a screw implanted, and where he had a couple of issues during his rookie season where we heard that maybe the screw was moving, maybe it wasn't. I haven't heard anything to suggest that that's the case with Demaryius Thomas, and when you watch those videos, it really seemed like they were paying more attention to his ankle. I don't remember, Tracy Wolfson, I think it was, saying over the past couple of weeks that it was his foot was bothering him, but again, I'm not seeing anything that makes me think that that's definitely what's going on, that this goes back to 2010 and it's a new issue that might become a chronic situation. I'd like to see him practice a little bit more. I'd like to see him move a little bit more comfortably, but I thought, even though there was some limping snaps that he took last week, I think he looked okay in the second half. And I think you can blame this on, the caliber of teams they've played, the game script as it's gone on. I think Demaryius Thomas is still going to be okay. I'm going to watch him closely this weekend, but I don't think there's reason to get too concerned just yet.
I was really hoping you'd say blame it on the rain. That's why I was please, just say it, Dr. Gene.
Fab and Rob.
That's right.
So this is what we'll use for Kirk Cousins. This is a mouthpiece, but we can make it look like a duck call. So every time he throws one of these ducks, yeah, basically. Yeah, like that. There we go.
Okay, that is the Duck Dynasty. By the way, they have to be careful, whoever's saying it's been bothering him for a couple of weeks. He hasn't been on the injury report. And that's something the Broncos could get in trouble for if that were the case. Because, and Belichick's done this for years, so this isn't a new thing. But if you're not on the injury report and you're injured, that doesn't sit well with Raj and the National Football League. So, and moving on from that, it is Dr. Gene Bramall talking about the latest injuries from one Bronco to a former Bronco in Brandon Marshall. And again, fantasy owners now, they're just like, we just want to know, please, because he's not supposed to play, then he does, and he scores 3 touchdowns. Then he's supposed to play, and then he gets a catch. So the ankle, again, in a similar vein to what we saw with Calvin Johnson, Dr. Gene, did not practice for the second straight day on Thursday, September 25th. That's today. So Brandon Marshall, how confident are you in his ability to play?
I think he'll play. I think there is room for concern with Brandon Marshall that I'm not saying yet about Calvin Johnson. I'm not saying about Demaryius Thomas. For a player like Brandon Marshall to not practice at all for what's going on pretty much the third week now, although there wasn't a clear video mechanism of something that looked like a high ankle sprain, you could convince yourself that when his foot was up in the air with his knee on the ground and the defender's knee brushed against it last week against the Jets, you could convince yourself that maybe there was a little bit of a high ankle mechanism there. It just would be unusual for a player of Brandon Marshall's caliber to not practice at all for 3 weeks with a fairly simple low ankle sprain. So not to say that this is going to be a Roddy White situation where it may linger for him for another month or so before he gets back to things. And we've seen Brandon Marshall not get his usual number of targets and still be heavily used in the red zone. Yet another pass that could have been a touchdown last week knocked away from him. So I think if he's active, maybe we're bumping him down his tiers a little bit because we know he's not going to get those 10 to 15 targets that he commonly gets when he's healthy. But the 5 to 7 targets he is going to get are going to be high leverage situations. He's going to be looked for in the red zone. And I think you could leave him in your lineup as a wide receiver 3. But until he's practicing a little bit more and we see him moving better on the field and he doesn't leave the field because of an aggravation or a little bit of a tweak in game, I think it's hard to expect him to be an elite wide receiver 1.
Gene, you've been very judiciously warning us about this nerve situation with Carson Palmer, and it's funny. And again, I don't want to make Gene blush, but when this was first reported, Gene said, "No matter what they say, this is indefinite. It might be a day, it might be a week, it might be a month, but they don't know." No one was saying that because it was such a surprise that he was inactive. Then within a week or two, it's, oh, well, no one knows when he's going to be back. But now Carson Palmer is saying in the middle of the bye week, I'm coming back week 5. Can he know that right now?
No, I don't think he can. I don't think he can. I think what we've heard is that he's throwing softly in practice. They're allowing him to throw a little bit, but we're not hearing anything about his grip strength. Nobody is saying that he's throwing the ball hard, 30, 40 passes, reps. And yes, he's still got 10 days to get ready for week 5, but these injuries, and we've seen it with stingers, with these kind of brachial plexus things, it's a little bit of a different spot than some of the stingers we've seen in the past. But if it doesn't heal within, and we've been saying this for weeks now, if it doesn't heal within those first couple of days, it's very often a 4-week or longer injury, and week 5 is right at that 4-week mark. So is it possible that Carson Palmer could be back in week 5? Yes, it's possible. Is it probable? I wouldn't call it probable until we see him throw meaningfully in practice, and that's not going to happen until next week. Even if he does come back at that week 4 mark, is his grip strength there? Is his arm strength there? Is his accuracy downfield going to be there? This isn't an injury that necessarily is going to have a high risk of an aggravation like a muscle strain might be. I mean, if he landed on it the right way and stretched those nerves out again in the same way, yes, it could recur, it could be re-aggravated, but it's not something to where just by virtue of him throwing the ball is this going to be made worse, unless his mechanics are off and he puts some pressure on that nerve. So I would be, if Palmer comes back in week 5, I would be reluctant to say that his arm strength would be there, his accuracy would be there, unless we hear that he's really slinging the ball around this week and then early next week. But I don't think that's likely. And to answer your question, I don't think he can know that right now.
So let's talk a little bit about Marvin Jones and his foot. Is he on track to practice? Is he going to be able to come back as early as Marvin Lewis predicted back in August, or are we still looking at I think it's going to be longer than what they're saying?
No, he's practicing now. He was looking good on the treadmill a couple of weeks ago. His rehab has gone very well. It's been pretty quiet, but Marvin Lewis has said on a couple of occasions, on a bye week, we're not really getting practice participation reports, but Jones is back at practice, as are a few of the other injured guys in Cincinnati right now on the defensive side of the ball. Jones is back at practice, and I think he's going to be available in week 5. Now, Sanu has been playing very well. Hopefully, A.J. Green is even more recovered than he was this time last week, and he's there. So I don't know that we're going to see Jones come back right away and get 40 to 50 offensive snaps and run more than 15 to 20 routes and get more than 4 to 6 targets. But I think he's on track to come back, and that means that by the second half of the season, he's going to be what we thought he would be earlier this year, even though Sanu has played well. I think Marvin Jones is going to be an important part of this offense down the second half of the year.
He is Dr. Gene Bramall from footballguys.com, at Gene Bramall on Twitter, and it's J, not G. Although there are some Genes out there, but it's J, Gene Bramall on Twitter. Let's take it around the horn one more time, Dr. Gene, and then we'll get into some news and notes around the NFL. And let's talk about Roddy White and the Atlanta Falcons. We're going to talk about Devin Hester coming up in a little bit, but Roddy White first here, and thoughts and expectations on Roddy. Of course, he does some work, hamstring, limited participant on Thursday. What are we looking here for Roddy, and when can fantasy owners be comfortable with him back in their lineup?
So what Roddy has told us in the past is if he fully practices and says he's good to go, he's good to go. Now we're getting conflicting information on Thursday because Roddy is telling us that he's ready to play, he thinks he's ready to go, but he's only had a limited practice so far. What I hope that means is we'll see Roddy back to a full practice, or at least when he talks in the locker room on Friday afternoon, his limited practice is the equivalent for him of a pretty full practice. If that's the case, then I think you can trust Roddy White in your lineups as you normally would, knowing that there's some small risk of aggravation that goes along with any hamstring injury. If he's limited and he's not quite as positive in his post-practice media interviews on Friday, then I think you have to consider the possibility that he won't be able to run all his routes, that we'll see what we saw last week, which is things are going to be, shunted over Julio Jones's way. And with Harry Douglas getting over that foot injury so well, he is fully practicing. We might see Roddy White in a little bit of a decoy role, or at minimum, see his targets cut significantly. So tomorrow's practice participation, Friday's practice participation, is going to be the key. And then hopefully we'll hear Roddy White very optimistic in his comments to the media as well.
So, Gene, watching Kirk Cousins tonight, I'm wondering, when is Robert Griffin III going to be healthy enough to play again?
I don't think it's going to be 4-6 weeks. I think 4 to 5 weeks was an optimistic, even if it's a subtalar dislocation and not a true ankle dislocation. I think 4 to 5 weeks is really pushing it, even though they're going to try to get his range of motion and weight-bearing status and his rehab back as soon as possible. But I think we're still looking at 6 to 8 weeks as a best-case scenario. So unlikely we see him before week 10 or 11.
So I can plug him back in my lineup in week 10 or 11? Sorry.
Let me get out my crystal ball here.
I'm just saying, because I had to trade a fourth and fifth round pick to Evan Silva today to get Ryan Fitzpatrick to cover a bye. Well, not a bye. I have Austin Davis, who apparently is going to be replaced by Sean Hill, because I lost RG3, and I thought, well, I better make plans and trade for a quarterback for the rest of the season. No, maybe I can get away with it for a little while.
I think best case scenario for RG3's owners is that Kirk Cousins does not take this job away from him, and that he comes back healthy enough. Yes, check. It's only been 3 bad quarters, 4 decent quarters. So that Cousins continues to be underwhelming, whatever it takes for Griffin to get back on the field, and that when he comes back, he has 2 or 3 weeks to kind of get back into condition, and that he's useful for you come fantasy playoff time. I think that's the best case scenario.
So what's the update on Vernon Davis, Gene?
Sounds like he's going to play. He's moving much better this week than he was last week. He's not been back to a full practice yet, but he's out there doing more, and it seems like he may have kind of turned the corner Saturday, Sunday of last week, but hadn't had time to make him a part of the game plan, didn't want to put him out there and risk any issues there. So I would expect, it won't surprise me if we see him fully practice tomorrow, but all signs are indicating that he's going to go on Sunday.
He is Dr. Gene Bramall. Check him out on Twitter at Gene Bramall. Make sure to check out footballguys.com for Bramall's great injury reports and pretty pictures and descriptions of things that only Dr. Gene could know, and he knows it better than anyone. Dr. Gene, stay hanging out with us here. I sound like Jay Cutler there, but just hanging out. And then let's get some Twitter questions going, man. I am charging you with the task of hashtag Audible Live. Let's make that happen.
I'm on it.
And there we go. That's what he is, man. He's a team player. He's
so,
like
Gene,
Robert.
Can we ask him one more question?
Let's do it.
What's a subluxation of a participle?
Well, that's a difficult question to ask because I think, the big concern with participles is that they dangle. But dangle is more than a subluxation. Subluxation, maybe the participle slips a little bit at the end of the sentence, then it comes back in. You kind of you edit your sentence a little bit and you put a little bit more at the end. It's not a dangling participle anymore. So I don't really think there is any such thing as a subluxed participle. How do you like that?
Wow. You can't mess with Gene Bramall.
No. He did the verbal part of the SATs, too.
It's the angle of the dangle. There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Gene Bramall getting that hashtag going. And we are back to talk about Kirk Cousins bad for the long run. Yeah. In 2 games this year, teams have been able to figure him out. Completed those first 12 passes against Jacksonville and opened up the game against Philadelphia with 8 straight completions, but then he's about a 50% passer. So it's not only getting film on him, Bloom, it's second-half adjustments. And Cousins, as we saw at Michigan State, where he was a 70% passer, yeah, a 70% passer when it's 7 yards or closer.
Sure, and it's just, as Kean Fahey pointed out, it's just a competent defense. The Eagles may not be one, but it looks like the Giants are one. But I really feel like I should just hand this one over to Matt, because, Matt, I think you had Cousins nailed. You were talking last week, right, about how if we see, or I don't know if it was you or not, but you've been hitting a note close to this, that if we see them run rollouts to the running back or tight end or do these things, it isn't that he's a good quarterback, it's that they're protecting the quarterback and they're giving him things he can execute, but he can't necessarily execute outside of those plays, and that's what we're seeing with Cousins. I mean, he's a backup quarterback. Maybe as a backup quarterbacks go, a pretty good one, but I think this will put to rest these questions about, well, whose job is it going to be when RG3 can play again?
Get out the duck call.
No.
Wow.
Yay!
And that one was bad. I don't think there's going to be any
Hang your head,
that makes
Kirk
this one look
Cousins.
good.
I haven't even gotten to that point. Oh, there it is. See, there we go.
No.
All right.
Wow.
I just did it on faith.
We're breaking live TV ground here, guys.
Here's
we're
the
all
deal.
seeing a play at a different time.
Here's the deal. I mean, Kirk Cousins. You talk to you that whole thing with kids, and you talk about how that their eyes are too big for their stomach when they go to the breakfast restaurant and order like the big stack of pancakes. Kirk Cousins, basically his eyes are too big for his arm. He tries to make throws into tight coverage that he can't make. There are some times when he's on, he makes some really nice plays because he, as Bloom mentioned, he's an aggressive quarterback. He has that daring. He will dare to make the big throw. The problem is that when coverage is tight, the window's small, and when pressure is on top of him, he wants to be the hero. And he's basically has he has an arrogance about him that most quarterbacks who are really good have, but he doesn't have the physical skills to back it up. And this is the kind of thing that happens to him when teams start to figure him out a little bit and see what his weaknesses are.
And that's happening live right in front of us with Kirk Cousins here. Imagine if Drew Stanton didn't have an arm. Because Drew Stanton's aggressive. Drew Stanton goes after it.
He's a stunt man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean Drew he is. I've been calling Darren Reeves, the running back for Carolina, a crash test dummy.
Yeah.
And mainly from the sense that he's just completely reckless, but his vision isn't great. The same thing is with Stanton. You gotta love him because he's a tough dude, but from a standpoint of just like smarts on a consistent basis with the game, it's just not quite there with him all the time. And that's what separates him from being, a decent starter from being a semi-competent backup.
No refinement to that game because it's all aggression. Like everything has to be fired in at 1,000 miles an hour. Like, you can throw a touch pass once in a while. You can check down once in a while. You don't always have to challenge that double team, Drew Stanton. That's just me. Bloom, give us an update. And besides the Kirk Cousins interception update, we have another score from another tight end in New York.
Right, Daniel Fells, the non-basketball playing Fells, he has 3 touchdowns in 4 games now. So between Donnell and Fells, you have 7 touchdowns. Tight end, a big position in this offense. But Eli Manning's doing so well against this defense. By the way, if you're wondering, it's Russell Wilson next week that comes to Washington, so you may see some good numbers there from Russell Wilson coming off of the bye. But you're seeing the numbers coming from Randall, 8 for 89, Cruz, 6 for 108, and Cruz looks good. Remember, Cruz had those 5 drops in the first 2 games. Now he's doing his thing out there, making guys miss. He's the guy who's the dynamic big play threat in this offense, and it's showing now with his 6 for 108, 18-yard average there. And it is not a Rashad Jennings night. And this is probably by design because we did see Andre Williams a lot earlier in this game. Andre Williams has 8 carries to Jennings' 13. Jennings only has the 1 reception. And as, again, 4 touchdowns all to tight ends. They are at the 2-yard line, so maybe Jennings gets a touchdown here as we go to the 4th quarter to help his owners. But if you have Jennings, you're happy. I mean, season-long outlook. And look, you didn't want them to do something like follow up his 34-carry game with a 25-carry game in Week 4 and break him for the rest of the year. He's never had an entire season as a feature back in his career. We're not sure how his body's going to hold up, so they're being wise here. They're coming through with the win. And the Giants, and, it's early. I mean, they're by 17. We don't want to probably put a bow on this one the way Cousins is playing. They have Atlanta coming down to town next week. That's not a tough draw. And the Eagles are the 3-0 favorite. But remember, the Redskins were able to do things against the Eagles last week. So the Giants should be looking at this division right now and saying, yeah, we can hang with anybody. This division's wide open. And much to our surprise after the first 2 games, the Giants look like they're going to be a contender.
Giants could be right there, that is for sure, and we're watching with bated breath what's going to happen at the beginning of the 4th quarter. There may be some garbage time coming. So, Matt, as we need to remind people, at the end of the 3rd quarter, Kirk Cousins is 215 through the air and 3 picks. But if there were to be garbage time, let's get out your crystal ball, Matt Waldman, in this game, the 4th quarter for Washington, who would be most benefiting from said garbage time?
Andre Roberts, I think, is going to be the most benefiting because they're going to throw the ball to him over the middle and dump it off on the short plays. And, as long as Cousins' eyes don't get so big, maybe Papa, QB coach over there, is going to say, look, you can't take such big bites out of the defense here because you're choking on it right now. You need to take those little bites and learn how to eat. So maybe that's what he's telling them there out on the bench right now, or at least told them. We'll see if he listens. This was something we talked about last week. Cousins capable of having a 400-yard day and 4 touchdowns, and he's capable of having a 400-yard day with 4 interceptions. And he's closer to that end of the spectrum right now.
Mama said there'd be days like this, and the Audible Live continues here. Footballguys.com, youtube.com/footballguys, DOTCOM. You can't go .com twice, but we did. So make sure to check us out every Thursday night right here. Make sure to check out our sponsor, FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com for a couple of nice contests that they have. $300,000 Survivor contest, of course, the Playboy contest. Fellas, you got to check that out. FanDuel.com, your home and leader for 1 week fantasy football leagues for real cash. With immediate cash payouts, make sure to check them out. Money is real. Entry fees start at just $1 at FanDuel.com, FanDuel.com. Sign up today. Well, you got to take a stand. What is the old saying? You got to take a stand for something or you'll fall for anything. Eddie Lacy taking a stand here after being called out by his coach, Mike McCarthy, and said, quote, Eddie needs to play better. I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't correct individuals in the media. We've seen the film. Corrections have been made. Our running game wasn't nearly what it needed to be, not even close quote. Reports coming through from PackersNews.com. Eddie Lacy needs to run lower. And certainly against the Lions had plenty of struggles against that defensive front. You can run on the Bears this week. So, Bloom, we'll start with you. Eddie Lacy, how good are you feeling about him? Nay, how great are you feeling about Eddie Lacy and his prospects against the Bears this week?
Sorry, I'm getting resituated here.
And
okay.
You're moving around, man.
I am. I'm doing the move. You remember this, Cease. Got to do that switch off for the staging the room here. I'm optimistic about Eddie Lacy. I think we do have to look objectively at the defenses they've played. The Seahawks, the Jets, the Lions. These are three very tough teams to run on. Eddie Lacy looks like normal 2013 Eddie Lacy to me. I don't even think he necessarily needs to run lower. It's his running style. He should stick with it. And as this offense moves, he will get touchdown opportunities. He will get opportunities to have numbers closer to what we expected. He's not a dynamic back. He's not a back who's going to break off 50 or 60-yard runs. But if this offense is producing, he's going to produce. I think that it's more an endemic of the entire offense. I think Aaron Rodgers isn't playing well. The offensive line isn't playing well. And when those things start to come into line, Eddie Lacy will come into line too. It should happen this week, although I will say this. I would actually expect this to be more of a street fight, 21-17 kind of game, like the game that happened up in Detroit last week, than a wide-open 35-31 kind of game.
Yeah, fantasy owners are hoping that it's wide open, but they've been hoping that for a while with Green Bay. And in talking to Adam Schefter a couple of days ago, Matt, I brought up Eddie Lacy, and Schefter expressed confidence in, publicly we know Mike McCarthy called him out. Privately, from what Adam is alluding to and saying, is that they still have confidence in Eddie Lacy. And again, considering the opponents, considering what we've seen from Lacy. And by the way, don't be that guy that tweets as Lacy's fumbling and be like, oh, you want this guy over Monte Ball? And then Ball goes out and fumbles against Seattle. Just saying. But in knowing that there may be some private confidence coming here, Matt Waldman, your confidence level on Eddie Lacy going forward?
It hasn't changed at all. And I think a good way of looking at this is it's the offensive line. Rashad Jennings is the opposite of what's been going on preseason, regular season. In the preseason, the Giants' offensive line looked horrible, but when you watch what Jennings did, he still looked like a pretty good back. If you're really studying what a running back's supposed to do in those situations, then now the offensive line looks very good. Or a lot better, at least, in New York. And Jennings is one of the three best fantasy backs in the league right now. Eddie Lacy looked like just an absolute beast in the preseason. Then the offensive line has had some issues, and he's not producing all that well. Well, guess what? Things will get a little bit better. This team will adjust, and Lacy will end up being a really nice find down the line here. Sometimes teams start off slow, and it's something that I wrote about this week, is that and if you go to the gut check column at Football Guys, you will find something that looks at 5 years worth of stats from what week 3 was for the past 5 years versus end of season for the past 5 years. And you're going to see some names that are repeat offenders who are slow starters and strong finishers, and also looking at retention rates, basically looking at guys who are wide receiver ones or quarterback ones to begin the season after week 3 and whether they stay that way. And a running back is the second lowest retention rate. It's basically a coin flip. If you're a running back one right now after week 3 for the past 5 years, that's a 50% chance that they're going to remain a running back one right now. And I think it's a 20% chance if you remain a running back 2. So there's going to be a lot of development between now and the end of the season. And if you have confidence to draft Eddie Lacy, I don't think you should trade him at this point because he doesn't look bad. His offensive line does, and they will get that fixed.
Well, you talked about starting slow and then coming on later in the year. What about not getting it done in the second half like San Francisco? So the next item of business, and continuing the running back conversation, Bloom, is Frank Gore and Carlos Hyde, and just the troubles that abound, the real distractions that abound, Tony Dungy, in San Francisco. And when you look at the lack of points being scored in the second half, as bad as the Rams team that went 1-15 a few years ago over the first 3 weeks of the season and scoring 3 points in the second half. So Carlos Hyde, Frank Gore, one trending up a little, one trending down a little. How should fantasy owners navigate this going forward, knowing that this offense looks out of sync and out of sorts, and certainly the second half woes continue now for 3 weeks?
Yes, and what's going to happen here, I think this week, and we talked about this on the preview, is that Harbaugh Kelly 3, and when Harbaugh beat Kelly at Stanford, it was a Toby Gerhart day with 38 carries for 223 and 3 touchdowns. And I believe I saw an article in the San Francisco media today about identity, and we talked about this on the preview show too, getting back to this identity. They have the guys to do this, and we weren't going to put any dirt on Frank Gore's grave yet. Remember, he had a 50-plus yard touchdown run that was called back by a ticky-tack Anquan Bolden penalty, so he still got something there. I would hope or guess that 30 to 35 carries between these two guys is what you are aiming to do if you're Jim Harbaugh in this game, and you're going to put Anthony Davis is going to be back, a massive upgrade over. He tweeted it out today, was unsure, but Jonathan Martin, that's a massive upgrade, especially in the running game. They have not been able to run right without Anthony Davis. So for this week, I think it's going to be both of these guys are good plays as flexes. Maybe Gore's running back too, and I don't think that Hyde's going to overtake Gore, but I do think that Hyde, if he continues to get these high leverage carries like in the red zone where he's been converting, he can continue to be a flex and somebody that as the season goes on gains a little bit more value. I do think both of them will do well this week against Philly.
Matt, your thoughts on that 49ers combo of Gore and Hyde?
I mean, I certainly think that Hyde has a little bit more pop to him right now, and he's looked good, but I wouldn't take too much away from Gore at this stage. I don't think Gore has looked especially bad. I just think that they've put Hyde in high leverage situations where he's going to get his confidence and he's going to be able to make some plays in space or on the edge and be able to do some quality work and kind of get him into the flow of the offense. So I still think this is going to be a committee split. And Gore is like some tough gristle. You're not going to be able to, you're basically not going to be able to get rid of him anytime soon. He's going to call his shot basically at the end. It's kind of like Steve Smith. He's the Steve Smith of running backs. He may not be exactly what he was before, but he's still going to command the ball. And I would doubt very seriously after this game, knowing that he had enough sack in his rookie year when the likes of Brandon Lloyd Part 1 and Terrell Owens and the rest of the team was yucking it up after big losses and talking about where they're going to go to the club, and this rookie balling out the team, crying and saying, and just basically calling them every name in the book, basically saying that they needed to learn how to be professionals and learn how to care about winning. I doubt very seriously after they spread this offense out and lost this game against the Cardinals that he didn't give the team, the coaching staff, and whoever was within earshot every barrel that he had in his arsenal to let them know that he needed to have the ball. And I'm sure they're going to listen to that for at least enough that as a fantasy owner you should be okay with him.
There's peace of mind, a piece of your mind, and there's straight up ass chewing. I believe Frank Gore was the latter as the Audible Live continues. By the way, had an Eli Manning rushing touchdown, so now with 4 passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown. Sometimes the bye week is so good. so good for you because you're like, I got to start Eli.
Do you think Eli Manning's pulse went up after he did that?
Good thing he's got a Citizen Echo watch. That
62.
By the way,
beats per second. Yeah.
Bloom, I'll toss this one to you. Super softball, real quick. Is Thursday night football good? I mean, we need a 45-point rule like we had in six-man football, where you get up by 45 points, you just call the game.
Yeah, well, what does seem to happen on Thursday nights now, a couple of weeks running, is these divergent paths where when one team just doesn't have it, they're like, "Yep, we don't got it tonight," and they just sleepwalk through the rest of the game. And that may be something that has to do with the short week. Honestly, you can understand how a team and what's one of the things that probably the biggest obstacle to us getting this right more often. Oh, this one's gonna go
worse than the last.
Yeah,
Put it away. I got tired already.
And this is really, and again, this is exactly what I was just speaking about. Okay, where because of the short week, you're weary, you're still hurting from the week before. I mean, Washington played an epic game against Philly. That was a tremendous back and forth game. Everything left out on the field. So in this game, when it's not happening, you just you're like Kirk Cousins. You know, you're looking at your watch. You're wondering how much longer it's going to be, wondering where you're going to get breakfast tomorrow or something, and getting this game over with. This one might be called back by, it's a holding on the return. Anyway, the point is, I do think that we have to watch out for these Thursday night games. When one team stumbles out of the gate, then you could see these games turn into laughers. And what's funny is we used to think of Thursday night games to break ties against Thursday night players because of the choppy nature of the play. But I think what we're seeing this year maybe is a different sort of trend. And I saw Adam Schefter tweet something out today that teams are competing 64% of passes, 64.3% of passes. So this could be part of being early in the season, and perhaps as we go more towards this passing league and the emphasis on these new rules, if you look at these Thursday night games, you might say, okay, next week, I'm going to try to pull up the schedule here so we can see it. Next week, who do we like? I think it's a divisional matchup. And who do we like in that game? And then we say, well, that team has a chance to have an absolute bonanza. It's the Vikings and the Packers, and the game's in Green Bay. So
there's your answer.
So next week you may play a Devontae Adams or Adam Corliss or Andrew Corliss or whatever, or in daily contests, the Thursday contests, you may take a longer look at some Packers, because this is 2 weeks in a row we've seen this pattern now, and I do think it's because it's so discouraging that if you fall behind by 2 or 3 touchdowns, you just say, hey, this one's over, and you really let yourself go slack.
Wrap it up. I'll take it. By the way, true story, both this football and the football that Matt Waldman has were both picked off from Kirk Cousins tonight. So
yeah,
I want that to be known. Back to the NFL action, as we see this one getting away on Thursday, of course. And back to some more running back questions here, and fantasy owner situations that you need to navigate. Donald Brown is in there. Now, we have to be open to the possibility. Matt, this one's for you first, then Bloom, get ready. You're on deck. Donald Brown. We have to be open to the possibility that Donald Brown takes this job from Ryan Matthews. And Matthews going to be out, let's say, another month. There was a question for Dr. Gene. Another 4 weeks, something like that. We know Danny Woodhead's not coming back. We'll see with Brandon Oliver what he can do. But with Donald Brown there specifically, great matchup against Jacksonville. And, Matt, we know that they'll have the commitment to take the air out of the football regardless of the success of the ground game. We've seen that clearly with San Diego. They're not going out to say we really got to get 150 yards from our ground game. They're just saying we really got to just keep moving the chains, and if it's 2.9 a carry, who cares? In fact, their rushes is 2.43 a carry. That's 32nd in the league. 98 rushes is 3rd in the league. First downs per rush is 31st. Third down percentage is 54.5%. So we know the intent to run the ball is there. We know that Donald Brown, this is why they got him, because they felt if Ryan Matthews goes down, if he doesn't go down in that playoff game against Denver, we could see a whole different playoff scenario unfold. More disappointment in the playoffs for Denver, but this time with San Diego advancing and not Denver advancing. Ryan Matthews was very key in that contest, and the loss of Ryan Matthews was a kick to the nuts for that team. They go out, they grab Donald Brown. Now's his time to shine. So we know, okay, it's Jacksonville, Matt. Easy, easy, easy. But going forward, is this a case where, and we've seen this before with Mike McCoy, a guy gets hurt, and all of a sudden they surprise you with someone, the guy never gets his job back. We've seen it before with Mike McCoy in Denver. So is there a chance that Donald Brown hangs on to this job? Most people look at him as a part-time pickup. And I know people that got him yesterday on waivers. So he's still out there, Matt.
Hold on for a minute. Did you just say that Donald Brown might possibly take Ryan Matthews' job? I just want to make sure that's what I heard.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, that is a possibility, and it is. I mean, Donald Brown is a veteran, and he is a versatile player in terms of being able to catch the football, and he can get outside with his speed. But I think that maybe 2 years ago, definitely 3 years ago, and most definitely 4 years ago, Donald Brown would have taken Ryan Matthews' job in these types of situations. But I do think, based on his work ethic, the improvements, the greater maturity that Ryan Matthews has, my opinion, no shot in hell. I think that it's really a situation where that you see the difference in what they were able to do in terms of these two backs early on this season. I think that Ryan Matthews offers so much more that even though he got hurt, I don't think he's going to lose his starting gig out of this. And at most, Donald Brown might slide over to the Danny Woodhead role, getting a little bit more as a pass receiver because of the fact that Woodhead is hurt and Brandon Oliver is just kind of meh, and they got rid of their best rookie and let the Arizona Cardinals sign him. So basically, they lost out on their future Pierre Thomas and Marion Grice and let the Cardinals get him. And I think that looking at this, Brown to me is he's a placeholder. He's certainly going to be a decent fantasy option for you as long as Matthews isn't back to full health and is rehabbing, but I don't see him carrying your fantasy team down the stretch.
Sigmund, is Donald Brown more than a part-time play?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Matthews is more – basically, I would say that what we've seen of them in the pros is that Matthews is Brown with more flexibility, more lateral agility, a better runner between the tackles, and honestly, he's probably been healthier than Brown, or at least shown that he can hold up under a heavy workload for longer than Brown has. So I do think that ideally, Brown gives you is the ability to let Matthews rest every second that he wants to before that knee feels like he's ready to come back, and then you pick up where you left off. So especially without Danny Woodhead, I think that they want to make sure that they have that continuity. And Matthews is still somebody to pick up. Although I think a good way to frame this, and just taking it from an entirely different angle, is if Ryan Matthews and Noshawn Moreno are both on your waiver wire right now, which one would you pick up? And I know that Gene could add a little bit to that, but assuming that they would roughly be back around the same time, I would probably prefer Moreno just because I do think that we're seeing Miami do better running the ball. And I do think that Matthews, you're going to continue to see him at that 15 to 18 touch a game level because, again, this team has designs. Look, one of the things that we should all start getting clued into at this point, it's week 3, it's week 4 now, so it's not too early to start thinking about these things this way. If we were to say who's the class of the AFC at this point, I mean, Denver has to be in the conversation, but San Diego is one of those teams. You watch the way they play, they don't have any obvious holes. They can play different modes with you on offense. They have the quarterback. They have depth in their passing game. Their offensive line continues to round into form. It sucks that they lost Melvin Ingram, but this is a defense that is tough to contend with. I can't wait for those Broncos-Chargers games because I think we're going to see those teams are a lot closer than a lot of people probably had them.
Denver quite beatable. Cincinnati and San Diego, certainly. That's the power structure in the AFC right now. And it may go, you could make the argument that it's Cincinnati, 1, then it's San Diego, then it's Denver. You could certainly make that argument. And who would have thought that 3 or 4 weeks ago? It is the Audible Live. We got about 10 minutes left in tonight's show, so Dr. Gene Bramall, I'm going to toss this one back to you. And I need to know what size of hat you wear, so I can get you one of these sweet NFL lids, Dr. Gene. You know, for the listeners and viewers that don't know, I've given you some fashion tips. May have given you a Sean John shirt as well that you need to rock more often. But I think you need one of these sweet NFL lids, man.
I'm a bit of a peanut head, so kind of a medium large. I'm a 7 1/4.
7 1/4. Duly noted.
Rock on. I'm rooting for
Peyton Hillis. Oh, it's Andre Williams.
Indeed.
Ooh. Look at
All right,
Andre.
so we do have 10 minutes left, so I'm gonna do a couple of these questions here. One, I think I've got a good question for each one of you, but I'm gonna bring one question to all three of you here, because I think we get to this point in the season, and it's time to decide whether or not your first round pick is a bust or not, and if you might be getting some guys that are trying to buy low on some of these folks. You may be trying to decide if you need to sell them high or if you need to get out of your shares as soon as you can. So I'm going to give each one of you guys, and one of these players is not really a top pick, but I'm going to give each one of you guys a player, and I want you to tell me whether or not it's time to give up, what it would take to get some of these guys off your roster at this point. So, Matt, let's start with LaShawn McCoy. 2 weeks in a row where he's gotten a good number of carries and not produced. Saw a little bit of an injury scare in both of those weeks, one with a possible concussion, one with a little bit of an ankle tweak. Came back in both of those games. As well as Philadelphia is moving the ball and putting points on the board, LaShawn McCoy has really not been a part of that. Is it something you're worried about? Would you be looking to cash him in, upgrade, or are we staying the course with LaShawn McCoy?
Tampa Bay, Jacksonville, Cleveland, Houston, Indianapolis. Let's see, and then later on in the season, Atlanta, Kansas City. I think you stay the course. If I'm looking at Dallas and Washington. So actually, I just recited Pittsburgh's schedule. So looking at this, we're actually looking at San Francisco, which is going to be a little bit tougher. St. Louis might be. Giants aren't bad. It's going to be a tough gamut for him through about week 8, ending with Arizona. But then, you look at Tennessee, Dallas twice, and then Washington week 16. The way I look at this is that if you have a solid team around you, then and you can cope with having LaShawn McCoy possibly being a running back 2 for you, or even a flex play for you in terms of performance, then you keep him, because I think that the injuries have been somewhat minor. This team will eventually get it together in terms of what it does along the offensive line. Sometimes when you have injuries along the offensive line, it means that the first couple of weeks that the new linemen are in, that there's going to be some adjustments that need to be made, and then things get a little bit better. Maybe not in pass protection, but certainly with run blocking, you often see that a little bit better. So I look at this, and I would stay optimistic with him, unless you are in a situation where the rest of your team is looking like LaShawn McCoy right now. And at that point, maybe you do sell your best player and sell him for enough 2 to 3 players that you can get possibly in return for him in some sort of package deal, who might offer you a little bit more consistency and upside from 2 to 3 touch points week to week.
Yeah, and I think for me that the offensive line injuries are the primary concern, and you saw when teams sell out to stop McCoy, which I think Washington did last week. They stacked the box. They funneled McCoy outside and had some pretty athletic players out there to make tackles. If the offensive line can't open up holes up the middle of the field in this particular division, I think LaShawn McCoy may have some trouble. But I'm not selling him for anything less than elite running back value at this point. Bloom, Andre Johnson. We see Ryan Fitzpatrick looking to DeAndre Hopkins a little bit more. Johnson has been fighting ankle injuries off and on. We're not sure exactly where the running game was. We debated on Sunday morning, is it smart to let Arian Foster rest a week thinking that you've got a winnable game against the Giants? And it didn't work out well in the favor. We've been waiting for Andre Johnson to kind of break out. The targets are still kind of there, but the catch percentage isn't there. The upside doesn't seem to be there. What do you think Andre Johnson's outlook is for the rest of the season?
Yeah, ungood. And here's the problem. You're going to have trouble predicting game scripts when the Texans stayed on schedule in the first 2 games of the season against Washington and Oakland, then you had a lot of third down passing. You had a lot of intermediate downfield passing to Andre Johnson to keep that offense matriculating down the field. Last week, when the Texans fell behind and this Giants team showed up, what we saw was Ryan Fitzpatrick out of his comfort zone in the second half, having to just wing it and work his Fitz magic. And in that case, he was throwing a lot more to DeAndre Hopkins. And in general, it wasn't targets to Johnson on these precise plays. We know that Johnson's not going to be heavily involved in the red zone. We know that if the Texans have their way, they'll throw the ball 20 or 25 times. And in the first few games, those resulted in 6 for 70, 6 for 80 kind of lines. But we're kind of looking at that as his ceiling, his weekly ceiling, because in the high-volume passing games, I'm not sure that Fitzpatrick's going to look towards Andre Johnson. I think Andre Johnson's closer to a low wide receiver 2, maybe a mid-wide receiver 2 in PPR leagues than the wide receiver 1 he's been in years past. And I do think DeAndre Hopkins is doing things to allow – look, Ryan Fitzpatrick likes to let it hang out there. I mean, you get the feeling that when he's asked – to just play sandlot ball, that he's at home doing that, and that's DeAndre Hopkins' game.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I wonder if mid-wide receiver 2, I'm not sure that I would put Andre Johnson in the top 20 at this point.
Right.
I think it remains to be seen. We'll sort of see where that goes. I really want to believe in Johnson. I think that if Arian Foster comes back, there's room for a little bit of a rebound, but I'd be concerned about him too. Cecil, Vincent Jackson, kind of the same question. We've got Mike Glennon taking over for Josh McCown out in Tampa Bay. We've got a defense that's imploding, so that may work in Vincent Jackson's favor. We've got this little bit of a wrist injury that I'm not sure exactly what's going on, a crack in the wrist that he's going to try to play through. How much of this concerns you with Vincent Jackson? Is the change to Mike Glennon, the likelihood that Tampa Bay is going to be behind often enough? Is there enough still with Vincent Jackson to see him as a top 15 wide receiver?
There's enough there with Vincent Jackson because of the size, the red zone ability, and you mentioned it, the defense. I'm excited by the Buccaneers' prospects with Mike Glennon at quarterback. We all have said it on this show before. Mike Glennon didn't have a bad rookie season. Then the Lovey factor came in. And we'll see. Jeff Tedford comes back. Things could change. But Glennon, and the willingness to throw it up and let the big man go get it. The things that Josh McCown and the Trestman magic, it's not Fitz magic, it's better. The Trestman magic, long gone from Josh McCown, it's better with Mike Glennon. He's got the arm, he's got the willingness, and he does have the ability to keep plays alive with his feet. He can climb the ladder. He's not a scrambler by any means, not going to break any ankles out there, but he'll keep plays alive with his feet, and he'll be aggressive. He'll have that mindset to go for it. This guy has stuff to prove. So with Vincent Jackson, for me, it's still there with him. We're assuming full health with Jackson, but he's the primary target in that offense that needs that shot in the arm, and that's where Glennon comes in. So I feel confident in Vincent Jackson. Plus, where I got him compared to where other receivers were drafted, what would you get in return at this point? So I'm still riding it out, and I'm interested to see if this Glennon thing turns it around.
All right, so those questions were from Ben Helms, by the way. Thanks for that. That was
Thanks,
wanted
Ben.
to know, at what point do we give up on Charles, who we talked about already, McCoy, Vincent Jackson, and Andre Johnson? I think it's a good time of year to start thinking about those questions. I'm going to go back to Bloom here. Bloom, since I gave you the wide receiver in that first question, I want Fantasy Sophist, another good question, often sends us some good stuff on Thursday nights. He wants to know which underperforming first-round running back has the best chance of rebounding and the worst chance of rebounding. And I think we can probably say that Adrian Peterson probably has the worst chance of rebounding. But I think probably maybe this is a compare-contrast between Jamal Charles, LaShawn McCoy, and even Matt Forte. Throw Eddie Lacy in there if you like. I think Le'Veon Bell and maybe Monte Ball, or kind of in that range as well. I think Bell, we know, is doing well. But I think definitely Charles and Forte and McCoy are in this mix, but for argument's sake, let's add Lacy and Ball in there as well.
Sure. I would say that Lacy and Forte, it's a little more schedule than anything. I think they'll be fine. I would bet on both of them getting back to the levels that we would have expected from them. Charles, I'm a little bit more worried about for the short term. For the long term, as long as it's not something that lingers, he should be fine. I am a little worried about McCoy. The only reason I'm worried about McCoy, well, two reasons. One is the offensive line, and you may just see, and Chip Kelly, it's kind of zen about this. I mean, if the pass is what's working, we're going to see more pass, and I think that is what's working right now. And I am a little worried that McCoy played most of last week concussed. I think we can't rule it out. So with the concussion he had 2 years ago, I'm less sure about him than I am about Forte and than I am about Lacey. So all in all, I do think that if we were to redraft these guys today, out of the top 4 that we were so sure of, I think that Forte would probably be the safest out of the 4. But as I said today on Twitter, Le'Veon Bell goes before all of them.
Upside down.
Inside out, round and round.
Boy, you turned me inside out. Indeed. All right, don't laugh at me. I'm coming back to you, Waldman. So quit your giggling. All right. So Joe Devine, another guy that sends us frequently some good questions, wants to know who's a better stash and redraft at this point, Devontae Adams or John Brown. And this is interesting to me because I'm wondering whose target counts is going to go up enough and whether or not they're not going to go up at all, and what you have here are some big play options of guys who the target count may not be there, but maybe if you're looking for an upside wide receiver 3 in a given matchup, that's the way to go. I think I know which way I'd prefer to go in this situation, but I'm interested in what you're thinking between Adams and Brown.
All right, well, I'm going to give you what my brain says, and I'm going to tell you what my gut says. My brain says that it's Devontae Adams, mainly because he's got Aaron Rodgers. He's also a good receiver when it comes to the fade route, so you're going to see more red zone opportunities for him. He's going to get matched up in situations where with one-on-one coverage, you should be able to see him do a little bit more. And then he's also really good after the catch, or I wouldn't say he's really good. He's pretty good after the catch. He has some nice moves, first moves to make people miss on slant routes and crossing routes. So you look at the situation, and I think he's, you look at his size, being an outside receiver, that he's probably a little bit better in that regard. But my gut tells me John Brown's the guy that you really want to have. And I guess the reason I see that is that I didn't get a chance to watch him at all at college. I saw one YouTube cut up, and the tape was so poor that I just didn't feel like I could accurately evaluate the guy, so I didn't bother. But watching him in Arizona, I understand why the comparisons to T.Y. Hilton are there, which makes him more of a boom-bust play. But I actually think Devontae Adams is a little bit of a boom-bust play more than people think. I don't like him. I think he's a little bit more inconsistent in tight coverage. And I think that there's a little bit more growing to do. He may overcome that and grow into a really fine player. But I think that John Brown, what he's doing as a as a guy who's getting hidden a lot in that offense, and that's the key. I mean, they're using him on trip sets where he's been able to run through the zone, and having Larry Fitzgerald and Michael Floyd run off the defense and him get one-on-one matchups in an open zone really makes a difference. But he's also making nice adjustments on the football. I think that he's shown something with his routes. I don't know if he's going to be – he's not in a situation where you would say that he should be as consistent as Adams is, but I just don't think Adams is going to be as consistent as people think. So to me, I'm looking at talent overruling fit here. And so from the gut feeling, my gut feeling is that John Brown is a more talented player.
Yeah, and I think most people would automatically go to, or at least would lean towards Adams in that situation, but I think it's a much closer decision than you think, mostly because I think everybody wants to make the leap from Devontae Adams, I don't know why I can't say Adams tonight, to James Jones, and I don't think that's there at all. So even though the Packers don't have a tight end that's a reliable option yet, even though the running game has struggled, and you would think that there's room for another 6 to 10 target guy as far as a wide receiver in this offense, I'm not yet convinced that Adams is that guy. Remember, it took James Jones a little ways to get into that area. So maybe we see that by the end of the year, but I think that's a much closer call than you might expect just at first glance of a question like that. All right, Cecil, last question from at FF Football Dave. wants to know what should we be looking for with the new quarterbacks like Teddy Bridgewater and Blake Bortles this week? Are there indicators that you're going to be looking for? He wants to know that they're progressing toward an elite category. Is that something we can expect to see from them this year? What are some of the signs that you're going to be paying attention to decide whether or not they may have fantasy value or they're progressing toward maybe becoming the next, not necessarily Russell Wilson and Andrew Luck, but players that are going to be long-term starters in the league?
Well, and we've seen this before with rookie quarterbacks coming in and either looking poor or looking decent enough. We all remember Big Ben and how he had such a limited thing, a limited offering each week because they just wanted to play defense and keep it simple for Ben. And that's one thing I'll be watching with both of these guys. Now, Teddy Bridgewater, my favorite because he's smart and accurate. And most of the time his first read is aggressive. It's downfield. It's let's attack. Let's go deep. So you want to see them work through their mistakes, but mainly I'll be watching for plays that don't go according to script. When a play goes to script, I have confidence in both Bortles and Teddy Bridgewater that can play action fake, pull it back in, make a read or two, and make an accurate throw. They'll do that. There'll be no problem with them doing that, in my opinion. What I want to see is when they're shown something, some sort of maybe not even that exotic of a blitz, when they're shown a defensive package that disguises the coverage, how do they respond? Are they still making those same throws? Are they still play action faking and then go, bird dogging their wide receiver and throwing into that tight coverage? Or do they learn? How do they make plays when the play breaks down in terms of keeping plays alive with their feet? Do they climb the ladder? Do they extend the play? Are they just pulling the ball down and running? Are they wetting the bed? These are all things that I'll be looking for because we've seen it with Derek Carr. Derek Carr, when he's blitzed, his completion percentage goes down by like 35%. So, and we knew that from Carr's game. So with Teddy and with Blake Bortles, it's more what do you do when the play doesn't go according to plan? And if they're able to make some plays and to show that it's not overwhelming to them, then that will be the good sign that fantasy owners need to look for and fans of those teams need to look for, as both of those quarterbacks are seen as the quarterbacks of the future with their respective squads. And that's it, Dr. Gene.
Indeed. That's what I had.
Look at you go. He's Dr. Gene Bramall. You follow him on Twitter at Gene Bramall. Bloom, any final thoughts tonight?
Well, again, the final thoughts, trying to get a handle on these Thursday night dynamics, as we had 4 blowouts now, 4 games where a team just gave up in the second half, and that we have to look at that when we're breaking down these Thursday night matchups. And, of course, the talk here will be about Eli and the Giants and this offense. And I think that this shows the mercurial nature of our takes and also of how easy it is, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody. I might be one of the most guilty of this of anybody, honestly, that whenever you have expectations of a narrative and things start to unfold that fit that narrative, that it's really easy to start to just move on. And I'm sure people can bring up all kinds of clips from our first few shows where we're saying, well, we wondered if the Giants would be a dumpster fire. Coughlin is old and tired. Who knows about Eli? These talk about him not buying in and a new install and the offensive line's not good and Odell Beckham's hurt and so on and so forth. And it was easy to look at those first 2 weeks and say, well, this is just not a team that we really have to take seriously. And obviously that's not true. And I think this weekend we're probably going to have some other that we file that way and say what we saw in the first few weeks is changing as we see these future weeks.
It's the adjustments that'll get you. Matt Waldman, final thoughts tonight.
This is Kirk Cousins. He emptied it all out on the field tonight, but there's still a little bit left in the interception machine.
There you go. Get out the horn and the bell. Dr. Gene, appreciate you, man. And what color of NFL hat do you want?
I'm colorblind. Surprise me.
Because he won't be able to tell the difference. Great.
Right.
Red, greenish, whatever. Thank you. It is the Audible Live every Thursday night. Check out footballguys.com. Check out FanDuel.com, our sponsor, and make sure to sign up. Now over 1,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel. So thank you guys. Bloom, you got the Sunday morning hangouts coming as well.
We firing with both guns.
There you go. He's Sigmund Bloom, at Sigmund Bloom on Twitter. Matt Waldman's at Matt Waldman. Gene Bramall's at Gene Bramall. The show is at The Audible. And I'm at Cecil Lammy saying thanks much for watching and listening. Stay tuned, and as always, stay frosty.